All right. I'm Matthew Mercer. I'm here with the Dayton Music History Project. I'm here with Rev Cool.
Thank you.
And so we're just going to sit down, have a conversation, and talk about the vibrant music history of Dayton and your career.
Okay.
So we're just going to start off with some questions here. Can you give us some, just like a brief personal background? Were you born in Dayton?
Okay. Well, I was born in Dayton, grew up in the east side basically. Probably really didn't get heavily involved in music until after high school. But there were some groups I remember being around. I especially remember the sort of a soul group, London Fog and the Continentals. I really enjoyed them a lot. They were what they call a salt and pepper group. There was a white backup band, the London Fog, and a black vocal group, and they were the Continentals.
Mm-hmm.
A three-piece. At one point there was a woman in the Continentals, one point there wasn't. And I think growing up in Dayton, I think one point that is very, very important about Dayton is that very similar to Detroit, I feel. Both were at one time very, very industrial towns, auto-making plants. A lot of people came up from the South to be in Motown or Funktown. And so we share a lot of that type of background history, and both are very much musical cities. So you have people coming from, black people come from the black diaspora, from the southern states, and you have a lot of white people from Appalachia. And when you talk about that, you're talking about rock and roll. Anything else?
Yeah, just move right along. What was your first exposure to local music here in Dayton?
The local music here in Dayton? That's pretty... Any particular local music?
Oh, no.
Okay. Well, in my personal experience, of course, you would see a lot of sort of like garage bands. There was a couple clubs, small little teen clubs really near me. I can't remember their names. In East Dayton, there was also over at Fort Park Plaza. There was like I think you called it the Hullabaloo Club and the Caverns, and there were a lot of groups come over there actually. But my own personal involvement in music really didn't get started until probably around 1970, 1971. I was always a fan of music, you know, always had listened to cassette tapes, listened to vinyl, made tapes of off the radio. We took a little cassette recorder, put it next to the radio, and said, oh, I have to time this just right so I get my favorite song, and then play and stop, you know, and that was my mixtape. Very, very sophisticated. And I think at one point my friend Dale actually drove off at a drive-through theater with one of the speakers off the drive-through thing. Mm-hmm. So he just incorporated that into his sound system of his car.
Nice.
So we'd have a cassette tape actually run on batteries and hooked up through that speaker. So,
very cool. Did you gravitate to any certain genre of music?
At first, I would say more rock stuff, and that's probably incorporated with a lot because you know around 1970, even before that, there was a lot of Vietnam War issues going on. The Vietnam War was going on. The draft was taking place. There was a lot of protests, so of course a lot of music went along with that as well. And then also there was the whole movement with the counterculture at that time, and there was a lot of concerts in the park. So in the parks, really, and free concerts in the parks. And so I started to get more and more involved in that way, and actually put on a couple concerts into life. I cannot remember the name of the bands, but a couple concerts at McKinley Park, which I'm not sure if it exists or not anymore, but it was right across from the Dayton Art Institute. Mm-hmm. And that's when the Art Institute was still actually a school. And so there were students that lived right in the apartments by the park there too. So it was sort of a vibrant scene in Dayton View at that time of sort of a counterculture type area. It was pretty integrated too, so it was a kind of a fun place to be at that particular time. And then as time progressed for me, I was traveling quite a bit to different parts of the country just because I wanted to see them. I traveled down to Miami to protest at the Republican Convention at that time, Detroit, places like that. But the key thing was I kept checking out music the whole time. And we started doing like a lot of benefit shows in Dayton to help with various causes, whether it might be starting a food co-op or counterculture causes. So we would do benefit shows. Well, as that went on, one time I was up in New York, and I had some friends that were in the Yippies at that time that lived on Bleecker Street. And if you look where Bleecker Street is, it runs right into Bowery. And Bleecker and Bowery is where CBGB's was.
Mm-hmm.
So I was staying like doors from CBGB's. So I'd go down there and, check stuff out. And this was like the mid-70s. So you'd see these incredible acts, but I had no idea at that time that was going to be, the beginning of an international sound music.
Right.
And then my friends and some friends in New York started doing loft parties with bands. And so I would see some of the New York bands up there, but also they had bands traveling through. So I met a band from Canada called DOA from Vancouver, and they were like some people consider a hardcore punk band. And I got to be friends with those guys and friends with another band from Vancouver called the Subhumans. And they were a couple of the earliest bands I brought from out of town to Dayton. They were like touring acts. And I remember Ken Lester, who was sort of like the manager of DOA, he said, "Well, you know how to do a political rally?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, you used to do the same thing except to promote a band." So good point. So that's sort of how I got into doing promoting bands. And also I forgot about this, I did a couple smoke-ins because I was advocating for legalization of marijuana. I don't smoke. I'm sober, clean, the most perfect person in the world. Got that, Mr. Camera. And then, so we did like a couple big rallies, and we had music at those as well. And most of the local groups, but I brought in on one of the, I can't remember what year it was, late 70s, I brought in a group from the Akron, Cleveland scene, and they were called Human Switchboard, and their first record was produced by Pero Booz, Dave Thomas, so they were deep, sort of like the Dead Boys, Cleveland, Bizarro scene. So they played at one of the smoke-ins, and people didn't know quite what to take those guys. But their first, they just had one single out at that time. So that sort of gave me a connection also with the whole Cleveland and Akron scene. So at a certain point in the late 70s, I said, well, there's nobody around here doing shows, so with this type of music, I guess I should start doing that. So me and a few friends started doing that, and I started working with some local groups. One was like sort of, I guess you'd call them new wave group at that time. They were called the Dates, and they had they had a number of members over time, but the two main members was Jeff Keating, who was a drummer, and Jerry Smith was the guitarist, and then the bassist changed, and the vocalist changed a couple of times. And so I worked with them because they had they developed a strong local following. I worked with them and would tie in a national group with them, or a national tour, and actually we're a national group. And so there's a lot of times they would play together, and then we would meet more and more like-minded music people. There were some down at some guys that ran, which is still there, Second Time Around Records, and they're still there, And so a lot of the clerks work there who were into music. So we started doing some shows, and the first punk rock shows we did were actually out at a place called Brookwood Hall. Have you heard of that at all? I think it's torn down, but it was a total crap hole. That's terrible.
I've been to many places.
It was like a cinder block building, no working bathrooms. Stuck as along the Miami River. You get flooded all the time. It's like. But so we brought a whole bunch of acts through there. Like DOA played there. That was one of the first punk shows in Dayton. And then we had a whole slew of acts here. I can't even remember them all. And then and also there was like, I feel sorry for this church. There was a local church in my neighborhood in Dayton View, run by the Unitarian Universalists, and they're sort of like open to everything, right? So we used the rec center, did a couple shows there as well, and some benefits there. We brought in one national. We brought in the Long Riders from, I think they were in L.A. at that time, and they were on their way to England, and so they stopped and they played at the church with Libertines from Cincinnati and a Dayton band called the Rulers, and we brought in a stage, put it in this little church rec room, and then I can't believe it. Then the next day was Sunday, and I think the guy promised to clean up after the show, sort of forgot.
Yeah.
So the church was filled with beer cans and stuff. They were too excited about that. But and also at that point, because I had these sort of political inclinations, so there was also something called Rock Against Racism going on in England with the Clash, and then the reggae groups like Steel Pulse and Aswad, and they had massive concerts there. Massive, because there was nothing. We never got the same thing going here. But so we started a coalition of various people in cities around the Midwest. So we had. Am I rambling on too much?
Oh no, this is what I'm
okay.
looking for.
We had rambling conversations all over the Midwest. But anyway, we cooked up with similar thinking people around the Midwest, and we actually had a conference at the Unitarian Church. It didn't totally kick us out. So they just have a conference there, and then we had people from they weren't really the Midwest, but Toronto, Hamilton, Ontario, Detroit, Grand Rapids, Indianapolis, Lexington, Louisville, let's say Columbus, Portsmouth, I think Portsmouth, Ohio, a little tiny town, city on the river, and some other places as well. And so we decided to put on, have a coalition of anti-racist music groups and work on helping each other, supporting each other on touring, but also help spread anti-racist things. Because at that time also, there was that whole skinhead movement starting up around, Chicago, all over through various parts of the country. So we thought one way to, if we had a sort of united front against that, it'd be more discouraged. And actually, the first many years of punk in Dayton, there was none of the Skins ever showed up. But they did show up once. And Ed Pittman from the Toxic Reasons and Louis Lerma, who's now in Team Void, he's El Muerto. Team Void beat the crap out of him and never came back. So, and nothing else at the at Portland Universal Unitarian Church. So we'd exchange groups and have that we have concerts all over the place. So just at Dayton, I'd have, let's say, the Dancing Cigarettes from Bloomington would come into play, and then we'd have Articles of Faith from Chicago, or we'd have the various Cleveland groups like the Waitresses, Chai Pig, Human Switchboard, the Action. The guy from the Action was actually the brother of Lux Interior from the Cramps. We'd have people from Columbus come play, Lexington come play, Louisville, and we'd exchange and also go there and develop sort of a whole network of groups. And also we'd have the Vancouver groups come out. And we actually had, so that was one way we developed the music. I think I'm rambling on that point. Any other questions?
Yeah. So when you were younger, did you strive to want to become a producer?
No, it just sort of happened.
Just kind of
it just happened
over time.
Yeah. I sort of had a theory of. Arrested Eagles used to have a literary magazine called Praxis. They saw that.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
They shut down our newspapers.
Right, but it's got Praxis. But I think Praxis means to put it in a non-intellectual means. It sort of means you learn by doing. Mm-hmm. And so that was my sort of philosophy. Well, okay, we need a fanzine. Well, we'll just do it. We need to make a record. Well, we'll just do it. Need to put on a show. We'll just do it. Why should we wait for somebody else to do it? Yeah. So that was sort of my theory. And I actually thought there was enough going on in Dayton at the time that, why could, if they could have a scene up in Akron or San Francisco, why couldn't we have one? Mm-hmm. So that was basically my interpretation of it.
And you briefly touched on how like McKinley Park was kind of a very integrated kind of scene where a lot of people could really come together. And Dayton's really had kind of a mixed history on segregation and integration issues. Did you see any real divide in Dayton, like as you were coming through your career?
As far as race and class, oh yeah, I would say totally, because I mean, it's clearly defined between East Dayton and West Dayton.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not as much today, but over the years there has been. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and as far as class, you know, I mean, it's everything changed, everything's in flux, but obviously you have some very wealthy suburbs,
Mm-hmm.
and then when things get gentrified in the city, the people who were living there before are no longer welcome, or can no longer afford to live there. And instead of figure a way to incorporate both. Usually people just get the boot.
Mm-hmm.
So,
do you think that had any kind of effect on like the music scene in Dayton at all?
You know, I think musicians tend to overcome that a little bit faster than the general population, because even when we were doing rock shows, there was a real good guitarist, African American guitarist named Cisco would play with a lot of the bands. We had there was an all-black punk group called Blackmail. I think Tony Houston is still around. He's playing like a blues band now. We brought in a band from Columbus called Screaming Urge, and with Mike Rock was the leader of that group, which was another sort of mixed race rock band. We had quite often I would put on bills. I would have a reggae band and a rock band together. I always had an intention of, like, I think people should overcome separation. At one time we had worked with Dennis Stewart of the Walnut Hills Bar, and we had, this lasted a couple months, we had on occasion night we'd call it Funk Meets Punk, and we'd get a punk band and team up with a funk group and put them on the same bill, which was sure to guarantee that audiences from both people groups wouldn't come. Not totally, but that's sometimes when you market things, it's kind of hard to market inclusion.
So, and some of the other conversations and interviews that we've sat down for, we've kind of discussed how the music scene has really changed over the years. Would you say that the Dayton music scene of today is missing anything in particular?
You know, it's kind of out of touch. I don't know if I can really speak on that well. Because when I go places, I still see a lot of bands out there, you know. And like there was a group, a bunch of young guys from, I think, Oakwood called Man Ray. I thought they were fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they put out 2 releases and then they disbanded, but you know, they were fantastic for those 2 releases. So, and people who just keep coming and going. For me to criticize or say something's missing from anything going on, I don't know if I can.
Mm-hmm.
I think there may be a little bit less intention of groups trying to make it on a regional scene or a national scene. A lot of people seem content just to play right here, which to me is either bad or good, but it'd be kind of nice for people to get out more.
Yeah.
I think the digital release stuff sort of has helped, but also hurt groups getting their material out. Because if you just put something digitally out and not have to worry about doing the production of something, I think it gets almost to be not as much of a push on the artist's part. Oh, we got it out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wait for somebody finds it online, you know.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I would have, and I really can't be too critical.
Yeah.
There's too many just great musicians.
Yeah. It's like we typically talk about like the dinner club scene that used to be very prevalent in Dayton.
I don't know nothing about that.
I don't know anything about it. It sounds like it would be a great time, but from my experience with Dayton's music scene, a lot of the music that's coming through wouldn't really fit that kind of environment and atmosphere. But yeah, who do you think were like some of the best bands to come out of Dayton?
To come out of Dayton in total?
Yeah. if you had to pick like a top 10,
I don't know.
even top 5.
I think as far as punk rock, Toxic Reasons. As far as maybe just the funk music, just so much. I think there's a lot of undiscovered funk groups that aren't really well known, that weren't signed nationally. I kind of like some of those a little bit better. I like the Ohio Players are great, but also like Robert Ward with the Untouchables I thought were kind of cool. There's a really good group called the Sidewinders. You don't hear too much about. That were like more not totally instrumental, but they did a lot of instrumentals, funky instrumentals. I like them. I'm sort of investigating a lot of older stuff recently, so maybe my head is going that direction. I really liked the London Fog and the Continentals when I was growing up, but they never made it national. They made like a regional record, they never made it nationally. Of course, Guided by Voices does a great job. They're constantly touring and probably put out more records than anybody in the history of the world. Like the Lowly Deal Sisters, sort of they made it, I guess, sort of made it outside of Dayton first, but still live here. That's hard for me to make a list of any one group. It's a group I like so much of it.
Yeah.
It's such and actually the more I investigate the older music, I find more and more stuff that's really, really cool. And you probably run across like that guy. I forget the guy named this Captain Crunch and Brew. They had a nice 45. I thought was good. There's a group called the Victorian Skiffle. If you heard of them, they were kind of cool. It was a good group. And they would all put out little 45s. That probably aren't that well known. They were great. And some of the stuff's really good. And then I did. Besides promoting shows, I had a record label too, and I called that one Iwana Records. Did you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I put out a bunch of different stuff. Well, the first Obvious record came out, and it's disputed between me and Bob how that came out, but that's okay. And then I put out a group called the Highwaymen, and then we were too naive and stupid to realize that Willie Nelson had a group called the Highwaymen. And there was also, well, we were. There was also Michael Row Your Boat Ashore by the Highwaymen. So those guys changed their name to Loose Diamonds. And then I think of the original group, Mark Patterson from the Highwaymen is now playing with Son Volt. He's a drummer in Son Volt. And he was also original drummer with the Toxic Reasons. So he's played with a ton of people. I mean, just Marcia Ball, just a whole bunch of people he's toured with. And then the lead singer from what was Highwaymen is Troy Campbell. He's living in Austin. And he did the Loose Diamonds. He has had a solo career, still does solo work. But the most interesting thing is he started a house of songs in Austin and in Arkansas. And he brings in artists from like other nations and other places, and then they work together with local musicians, and then they try to create something new. And that's going on, and those in both Austin and in Little Rock. And so I think that's pretty cool. And then I did a group called the Obvious. They were like more of a young, snotty punk band, and they had a song called Home. And because I'm so responsible, I made him record it twice, because one version said "Shitty Home." I said, "Well, nobody's going to play on the radio." So they recorded both versions. But actually, that got a pretty good review, like in the Village Voice. And you mentioned that. Must be a good song. We recorded twice without shit. So, and all those records got a pretty good distribution and write-ups and charting on the College Music Journal. And I did a compilation called Hard to Be Cool in Uncool World, which had a bunch of different groups on it. It had the True Believers from Austin. I can't go through the whole list. The Human Switchboard. We had The Obvious did something for it from Dayton. Had some groups from just all over the country. Just so I thought, Mechanormal from Vancouver, a bunch of different. It's a pretty all over the place type album, and I guess the line philosophy behind that was just to create a record that would have just what I thought were cool bands from different places that you wouldn't normally hear, basically.
Yeah.
And then that got a whole bunch of good reviews and charted pretty well on the college charts. And it had, what else? I did Tuba Blues, which were an interesting group that had a tuba in the group. I thought that was interesting, but I don't know how much everybody else did. But I thought it was good, you know.
I would go just for the pun. Tuba Blues, you got a tuba? All right.
Okay. And then at a certain point, I decided, well, I'm having kids, and I have to figure out what I'm going to do. So it was kind of hard to do tons and tons of live shows and have little kids. So I figured, well, I had to either be a father or be a rock drummer. So I just shot for the father side. And I kept doing my radio show on WYSO, and I still do that to this day. So then, besides this, and then actually the label continued. I basically said if you want to put something out, you can just say I put it out, and you can put it out. So we had like 4 or 5 groups that did that, but that was fine with me. You know? Then because it had a little bit of distribution, you know, and then, I'm not saying we got paid well by the distribution, but we had distribution. And
is that still active today?
The label?
Yeah.
Just in my mind.
It's like if a band came through and offered something like that, saying that.
Oh, well, they could use it, sure. I mean, I just had to talk clear with me.
Yeah.
But the distribution is whole different because everything's digital now.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to do that. I could figure it out, I guess, but I just don't know how to do it. Because I never had to.
Yeah.
Well, but I had to like actually take vinyl, put it into a cardboard box, put press in it, tape it up, bring it to the post office, and mail it, media mail or something.
Yeah.
Hundreds. You know. So and then get the distributors and find someone who's willing to sell it in Italy, whatever. And then figure out how I'm going to get my money from the guy living in England who's distributed it to, you know, which isn't always easy. So people tell me they've seen records all over the place. Oh, I get paid for that. But anyway, then I had a fanzine too. Then that was called I Wanna too. I want a magazine. I want a record. I want a magazine. I want everything. And it was actually a newsprint format, and maybe it's up to 16, 20 pages. It's pretty, you know, sort of like probably a little bit bigger than Guardian. I don't know how big the Guardian is, but you know, that type of thing. Yeah. And we interviewed a whole bunch of people. We had reggae groups like Steel Pulse, Dead Kennedys, the English Beat, the Slits, Blondie, just a whole bunch of people. Local groups, like there's a group called Dementia Precox, we did a nice piece on them. Rank and File, they were a cowpunk group back in the, well, there's Tony, there's Tony from Rank and File. They eventually ended up in Austin. We had a lot of Austin groups come through too. And then besides that, I also did I had my radio show. So I've been doing this since 1982. And on the very first show, I incorporated not only rock, I played a 45 by REM on the Hiptone label. I forget which 45 it was. Radio Free Europe, I think. And then I played Fela Kuti from Nigeria. And at that time, you could only find his stuff on vinyl from import places. And I played, this is all vinyl cassette at that point. And then had a bunch of different local groups and rock groups and reggae. That was all one show. So that format hasn't changed too much over all these years.
So with your radio show, you really get a first-hand look of really the music scene from a lot of different viewpoints. What would you say is like your favorite thing about doing the radio show that's kept you doing it for, so you started in 1982?
Oh, so I started in 1982, and then most of the stuff we've been talking about in the past, I guess I didn't give any dates, would be from the mid-70s to mid-80s, that I was covering in with the fanzines and all that. I forget what your question was.
What's kept you inspired?
Oh, inspired. Okay, you know, I was a teacher in the Dayton Public Schools for several decades.